My name is Helen Patricia Monroe. I'm 74 years old. I was born and raised in a small town just outside Lexington, Kentucky, and I've spent my entire life putting my family first. I was a seamstress for over 40 years, stitched together dreams with aching hands and sleepless nights, raised 3 boys mostly on my own after my husband passed young, and I never once asked for anything in return. That's why what happened on my son's wedding day broke me, not because of the insult, but because of who delivered it. The bride, her name's Jessica, turned to me right before the reception started, her eyes full of spite and her voice low enough to sound polite but sharp enough to draw blood. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, "we're asking all non-essential guests to leave this part of the evening. There's no seat for you at the main table. You can wait in the lounge. Or leave if that's more comfortable." I laughed because I thought it was a joke. But then she added, "Oh, and if you must stay, please don't approach the photographers. We want the family-only shots to look uniform." My heart dropped. Not only had I paid for over 70% of this wedding, including her dress, the venue, the catering, the flowers, and the hotel block for her entire family, but now I was being told I wasn't part of my own son's family. I looked at my son, David. He was watching from a few feet away, standing stiff like a scolded child, avoiding my eyes. That was all the confirmation I needed. He wasn't going to defend me. They were really kicking me out. In that moment, something inside me, something I didn't even know was there, snapped. Not in rage, not in tears, but in cold, clear resolve. I smiled politely, walked out of that venue with grace, got into the town car I had arranged for myself. Yes, I booked it, and pulled out my phone. One by one I started making calls. The first was to the florist. "Cancel the final payment. I'm revoking authorization." "Yes, even if it's already delivered." The second was to the hotel manager. "I'm retracting my card from the family block. The bride's side will need to provide another method of payment." The third was to the wedding planner. "Consider this your formal instruction to pull back the remaining decor installations before the evening party begins. No further charges will be covered by me." You should have seen how quickly the color drained from their faces when word got around that Grandma Monroe had taken back her blessing and her money. But that wasn't even the start. Because this story didn't begin at the wedding. No, this started years ago, when I first met Jessica and saw a glint of something cold behind her rehearsed smiles. I should have trusted my instincts. I didn't. And it cost me more than just money, it cost me my place in my own family. But it's what I did next that made them regret ever underestimating me. Because if there's one thing they forgot about the woman who raised 3 boys on her own with nothing but a sewing machine and sheer will, it's that you don't kick her out of the house she built and expect her to walk away quietly. Let me take you back, before the wedding, before the betrayal, to where it all really began. Back when David first brought her home. And I opened my arms to her. When I should have kept the door closed. But before we go there, before you hear what I tolerated, what I sacrificed, and what I finally learned, ask yourself this. What would you do if your child stood by and let someone else erase you? Would you walk away? Or would you remind them who held the pen all along? Let me show you what I chose. And trust me, it shook everything. If you want to hear how it all started, the signs I missed, the red flags I ignored, and the painful path to betrayal, then stick with me. Next chapter is coming. Comment, continue, and tell me where you're watching from. David brought Jessica home on a rainy Thursday evening, 4 years before the wedding that would shatter everything. I remember it clearly. The sky was dark early. The living room smelled of cinnamon from the apple crisp I'd baked, and I had a fresh quilt folded neatly on the armrest in case the wind made the night feel too sharp. I didn't expect him to bring anyone. He didn't call ahead. He just walked in, soaking wet, dragging a girl behind him who looked like she'd never touched mud in her life. "Mom," David said, shaking off his jacket at the door. "This is Jessica." "Jess, this is my mom." I extended my hand, warm and dry, soft from years of kneading dough and darning socks. Hers didn't meet mine. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and gave me a smile that never reached her eyes. "Nice place," she said. I tried not to feel the sting, but I saw how her eyes traveled over the old wallpaper, the hand-sewn curtains, the mismatched chairs that I'd refinished myself. Her face didn't flinch, but it didn't need to. David didn't notice. He was too busy looking at her like she hung the stars. That was the first red flag, the way she subtly recoiled from the world I built. But I brushed it off. Told myself I was being sensitive. Isn't that what we all do when our children fall in love? We make space. Smile. We shrink. That night, she didn't say much at dinner. She pushed peas around on her plate. Declined dessert. And when I offered her a blanket for the chill, she said, "No thanks. I brought my own." I wondered then if that was her way of keeping a wall up, but I chalked it up to nerves. Not everyone knows how to act around a mother. Especially one who's been both mother and father her whole life. Over the next few months I tried my best. I invited her to Thanksgiving. She wore white and scrolled through her phone during grace. I gave her a locket one Christmas, an heirloom from my mother, a Monroe piece passed down for 3 generations. Jessica opened the box, stared at it, then said, "Oh, vintage. I should have taken it back." But David, he looked so proud every time she smiled his way. He started dressing different, speaking different. He traded in our weekly fishing trips for weekends at her parents' country club. And every time I gently asked if we could spend more time together, he'd say, "You know I'm just busy, Mom. Jess's schedule is packed." It was clear she was pulling the strings. But what could I do? He was happy. Or at least that's what I told myself. That's what mothers do. We lie to ourselves so our children can live their fantasy a little longer. Until one day she came to me. Just the two of us in my kitchen. The sun was peeking through the window, shining on the tile. I laid myself with a busted knee and aching back. "David and I are planning the wedding," she said, not asking, not inviting. Smiled. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. How can I help?" She opened her planner like a general preparing for battle. "We're aiming for an elegant, modern look. Soft neutrals, classic floral, very minimalistic. Oh, and we'd love your support. Financially, I mean." Blinked. "Of course I'll help. What's the budget?" She slid a paper across the table. Typed, printed, itemized. "Over $70,000. "70?" I whispered. "Just a baseline," she said with that same calm frost. "Of course, we'd be grateful for anything you can manage. You are the mother of the groom." It wasn't the amount. It was the entitlement. But still I nodded. "I'll do what I can." And I did. I dipped into the retirement savings I'd been building for a quiet trip to Alaska. I canceled my plan to get the water heater replaced. I even delayed a dental surgery, just to help fund her vision. Because it was my son's wedding. Because it mattered to me, even if I didn't matter to her. But as planning continued, I noticed something chilling. I was being erased. From the website. From the seating charts. From the guest list. She told David my sister's +1 would clash with the aesthetic. She changed the song for the mother-son dance. Said the one we chose was too country. And when I tried to suggest inviting my old neighbor, she said, "Let's keep it tight. You know, classy." Each time I brought it up with David, he looked overwhelmed. "You know how she gets, Mom. Just, let's not stir things." He'd stopped calling me Ma. It was now Mom, cold and sharp. Like her. But I stayed quiet. Because I thought that if I just got through the day, maybe afterward things would go back to normal. Then came the final blow. 2 weeks before the wedding, Jessica called me. Not David, Jessica. "We decided to seat the bridal party's parents together. But we want symmetry. So we're seating your side at a different table. Still close, of course." I asked, "You mean I won't be seated next to my son?" She hesitated. Then said, "Well, you're technically not part of the bridal party. It's nothing personal." Nothing personal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask how she could take everything from me. My savings, my son, my dignity. And still act like I should feel grateful to be there. But I didn't. Instead I hung up the phone. Sat at my kitchen table. and cried harder than I had since David was born. And still, I showed up. I wore the dress they chose, the shoes they bought. I styled my hair in the way Jessica suggested, pulled back neat, nothing too bold. I smiled through photos. I held back tears during the vows. I clapped when they kissed. And when I saw they had added her mother's name to the program under parents of the groom, I said nothing. 'Cause it wasn't my day. It was theirs. Until they told me to leave. Until my own son didn't stop them. Until I stood outside, trembling, remembering every dollar, every moment, every dream I'd handed over, and realized I had nothing left, except my power to take it all back. And I did. But that was just the beginning. Because what I found out next, after I started pulling back the money, the favors, the bookings, revealed something far darker than I expected. Jessica wasn't just ungrateful. She was hiding something. And once I uncovered it, the entire marriage was at risk of collapsing. Want to know what she was hiding? Trust me, you'll want to hear what I found. Chapter 3 will break everything wide open. If you're following this story, comment, ready for the next chapter, and share this with someone who needs to hear what quiet women are capable of when pushed too far. I didn't set out to ruin the wedding. I just wanted my dignity back. But as I began untangling myself from their plans, reclaiming what I'd invested, pulling back my financial strings, I found something that made my hands shake and my heart turn cold. It began with a florist's invoice. The florist I hired, Linda, had been a friend of mine for 20 years. She texted me after I canceled the final payment. "I'm so sorry, Helen," she wrote. "Jessica told me she'd already spoken to you about the additional arrangements for the bridal suite. I went ahead because she said you were covering it." I stared at the message. Additional arrangements. I hadn't approved anything new. I asked for the breakdown. When Linda sent it, my blood ran cold. There were 2 full flower arrangements ordered under my name, for a private honeymoon suite at the Meadowbrook Inn. A romantic setup, candles, champagne. Scheduled for the night before the wedding. But the reservation wasn't in David's name. It was under Daniel Connolly. I didn't know who that was. I looked through the details again, confused. My card had been charged for part of it, until I shut everything down. That was how Linda found out something was wrong. I sat there at the table, staring at that name. Daniel Connolly. My gut twisted. I typed it into Facebook. Hundreds of results. Nothing obvious. Then I remembered wedding website. Jessica had linked her bridal party, including old friends and contacts. I searched her followers. There he was. Daniel Connolly, tanned, sharp-jawed, grinning in a boat with Jessica beside him. No tags. But the image was unmistakable. It was from just 6 months ago. Captioned with one word. Always. Clicked through his page. My breath hitched. More photos. More hidden comments. Some of them went back years. Beach vacations. Hotel lobbies. Matching shirts. There were no direct signs of romance, at least not overt, but the familiarity was there. The pattern was clear. Jessica had been close to him for a long, long time. Far too close. And here I was, footing the bill for their secret luxury suite. Well, I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry, furious, but I kept it quiet. I needed more. So I reached out to an old friend, Anna, who worked the front desk at Meadowbrook. We'd gone to church together for decades. I asked if she could discreetly check who checked in under that suite the night before the wedding. She called me that same night. Jessica Matthews checked in at 8:12 p.m. with a guest. Blonde man. Not your son. I paused. I didn't want to say anything, Helen. But I thought you knew. I didn't. And just like that, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about truth. And protecting my son, even if he didn't think he needed it. I spent the next few days gathering receipts, statements, and screenshots. Anything that showed Jessica using my resources for someone other than David. I kept it quiet, calm, methodical, until I got a call that almost made me stop everything. It was from David. "Mom, why did the hotel say your card was declined? Jess's parents are freaking out." We had to cover 5 rooms this morning. I steadied my voice. Because I cancelled the arrangement, David. I was asked to leave your wedding. I figured you didn't want my involvement anymore. There was silence. Then, you didn't have to do that. But you didn't stop her either, I said, keeping my tone even. You watched her ask me to leave. You didn't say a word. He started to protest, but I cut in. And tell me, David, do you know who Daniel Connolly is? He went quiet again. I could hear Jessica in the background, her voice rising. I asked softly, you didn't book the suite at Meadowbrook, did you? Blick. He hung up. And that was when I knew I'd struck a nerve. The next day, Jessica showed up at my house. She didn't knock. She banged. I opened the door and she shoved her phone in my face. What are you trying to do? You're ruining everything. I looked her in the eyes and replied, no, Jessica. You ruined everything when you used me like a bank and lied to my son. Her eyes flared. You don't have proof. I have more than you think, I said. And unless you want it shown to every single guest who toasted you Saturday night, I suggest you sit down and talk to me like a grown woman. He didn't. She stormed off, got in her car, and peeled away like a teenager caught with a secret. But the damage was done. My son called again that evening, this time from a quiet place. He sounded broken. Mom, is it true? What you said about her? I didn't answer. I sent him the pictures instead. The receipts, the messages, everything. Took him a long time to respond. When he did, his voice cracked. What do I do? And that's where the real story began. Because now the question was no longer about revenge, but whether the truth would save him, or destroy him. The next chapter is coming, and it's where everything begins to fall apart for Jessica. If you've been wronged and stayed silent, you'll want to hear what happens next. Type, ready for the next chapter. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs a reminder. Quiet doesn't mean weak. David didn't show up at my house for 2 days after I sent him the evidence. 2 full days of silence. I kept checking my phone, waiting for a knock, listening for that old familiar shuffle of his shoes on my porch. But nothing. Then, late Sunday afternoon, just as the sun was dipping behind the trees, he pulled up in his car, parked crooked in the driveway like he was in a rush or panic, and stepped out with his head low and his shoulders caved in. He looked like a child again. He didn't speak right away. Just walked past me into the house, like he'd done 1,000 times as a boy, when his heart was too heavy for words. I closed the door behind him. I confronted her, he said finally, standing in the middle of my living room like it belonged to someone else. She didn't even try to deny it. My chest tightened. She said it was nothing, that it was before me. But I asked her why she booked that suite, why she used your card, why she hid it. He sat down on the edge of the couch, his hands tangled in his hair. And, she said she didn't think I'd understand her friendship with Daniel, that he's just someone who always calms her nerves. He looked up at me, eyes rimmed red. But I'm not stupid, Mom. I saw the messages. I saw the photos you sent. There's no way that's just a friend. I sat beside him. I didn't want to hurt you, David. But I wasn't going to sit back and watch you give your life to someone who doesn't respect it. He nodded slowly. I asked her to leave. She packed a bag and went to her parents. She told me if I didn't apologize for accusing her, she'd go public. Say I was controlling, that you were abusive. I stiffened. Abusive? That's her word, not mine. She said you were obsessed with me. That you'd always tried to control my choices. And this was just another example. I felt a stab in my chest. Is that what you believe? He looked at me, really looked at me, and his lip trembled. No. No. I've been so far up inside her world, I stopped seeing clearly. There was a long silence between us. Then he whispered. She even asked me to go through your bank records. Said she had a right to know how much money you really had left, just in case we needed to take over your care later. I went still. She what? He nodded. She was planning everything, Mom. The wedding, the optics, the finances, the narrative. It was all a chessboard. And I was the king she wanted to keep trapped. I stood up, trembling with anger. She never loved you. She loved the access, the control, the image. I know, he said, his voice cracking. I just didn't want to believe it. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about recovery. So I told him everything. How she cut me out. How she told me not to speak to the photographers. How she looked me in the eye at the wedding and told me to leave like I was a stain on her perfect day. I told him how I cried in my car, alone in my gown, and made the decision to take every cent back. Not out of revenge but out of survival. I showed him the letters I drafted. To the vendors, the hotel, the planner. I showed him the calculations of how deep I'd gone into my savings. How I'd postponed my surgery. How I'd stayed silent to protect his illusion of happiness. He sat there, shattered, holding the truth in his hands. Then he asked me a question I'll never forget. Do you think I deserve to start over? I turned to him, eyes steady. Only if you start by telling the truth. To yourself. To your friends. To anyone who matters. The only way to rebuild, David, is to stop lying for someone else's comfort. And he did. Over the next week, he called every guest they'd invited to the wedding. He told them the wedding was void. That he'd been manipulated. That the marriage was never real. And Jessica, she didn't go quietly. She posted online. Claimed I emotionally blackmailed her. That I sabotaged their day out of jealousy. She twisted the story, made herself the victim. But David had receipts now. He shared the photos, the sweet invoice, text messages, the undeniable timeline. Suddenly, sympathy dried up. Friends stopped responding to her stories. Her own parents, who'd once stared down their noses at me, called me and apologized. But I didn't take joy in any of it. Because the truth is, I didn't want revenge. I just wanted respect. The respect every mother deserves after giving her life to raise a child. The respect I should have been shown long before a wedding ever took place. Still, there was one more twist I didn't see coming. Jessica came back. Not with an apology, but with a threat. She showed up at my door, again, this time with a legal envelope. Opened it. Inside was a demand for repayment. She claimed I had agreed to fund the wedding without condition, and that retracting payment had caused her emotional distress and financial loss. She was suing me. Suing me, the same woman who paid for her dress, her photos, her honeymoon suite for a man not my son, and got kicked out like trash. But what she didn't know was that I had one last surprise. Something that would make that lawsuit crumble before it even made it to court. Because while she was playing chess, I'd been quietly building my own board. In the chapter, you'll find out the secret I had in my back pocket. Something Jessica never saw coming. If you're loving this story, drop "Justice is Coming" in the comments and don't forget to follow along. We're just getting to the good part. The envelope in my hands felt heavier than paper. It felt like betrayal sealed with glue. Jessica was suing me for rescinding payment on her wedding, the one I had been excluded from, humiliated at, and tossed out of like a coat nobody wanted anymore. Her handwriting was on the outer envelope. Not a lawyer's, not a firm's, hers. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about money. This was about power, control, and revenge. I stared at the document on my dining room table, the same table where I'd taught David to count, where we'd celebrated birthdays and wrapped Christmas presents. And now here it was, being used as the stage for war. She wanted repayment for emotional distress. Claimed I'd maliciously disrupted a legally binding event and caused irreparable damage to her social and financial status. It was laughable. Until I realized she'd really filed it. She meant it. But what Jessica didn't know was that long before she ever came into our lives, I had taken steps to protect myself. I'd been through enough in life. Losing a husband young, raising 3 kids on a secretary's salary, getting cheated out of a property once by my own brother, to know better than to trust blindly. Which is why the moment I started pouring money into that wedding, I had made every vendor sign a conditional release of funds clause. I hadn't told anyone, not even David. It was a clause that stated I could cancel or reverse payment if I, as the financier, was mistreated, removed, or if the funds were used in a manner outside of agreed terms. It was standard language in contract law. Boring to some, but powerful in the right hands. I'd also kept every receipt, every invoice, every email and voicemail. Down to the text she sent saying, "We'll seat you elsewhere, it's nothing personal." I had proof. But what I didn't have was peace. Because even with all this, my ducks in a row, my dignity crawling back, there was one thing I still hadn't faced. My son. Not the broken version of him who sat in my living room crying, but the man who had let it happen. I needed him to look me in the eye and understand. David came by again that night. His face was drawn like he hadn't slept in days. He handed me a folder, sat down and said, "Her parents want to mediate." "Mediation?" "Yes." He nodded. "They think it'll look better if we settle. Keep it quiet. They're scared she'll drag the family name through the mud." "She already did," I said. "She's unraveling, Mom. Posting on forums. Emailing vendors. She even threatened the photographer. What's she hoping to get out of this?" "She wants her wedding rewritten," he said. "She's trying to erase what really happened and make you the villain." I folded my hands. "Then it's time the world hears the real story." David's face turned pale. "You're going to fight her?" "Son," I said, "this isn't a fight. It's a reckoning." I reached into the side drawer and pulled out a thumb drive. Contained everything. The payment contracts. The florist's sworn statement. The hotel's security log. The messages from Daniel Connolly that Jessica had accidentally backed up to a shared drive during the planning phase. She'd used my laptop once months ago and synced her iCloud. She never unsynced it. That's how I found them. Dozens of deleted messages, recovered by accident, now sitting in a folder labeled, "Just in case." David's eyes widened as he read them. "Is this all real?" He nodded. "She wanted to build a castle on lies, David. But she forgot, truth doesn't need bricks. It stands on its own." We brought the folder to a lawyer the next morning. A young woman named Cassidy who reviewed everything with sharp eyes and an even sharper mouth. "She doesn't have a case," Cassidy said plainly. "In fact, if you want to countersue for fraud and emotional damages, we can." I didn't want to. I didn't want blood money. I just wanted it over. But Jessica wasn't going down without a show. 2 days later, a post appeared on Facebook. It was Jessica, wearing her wedding dress in front of a broken mirror, captioned, "What do you do when the woman who birthed your husband tries to destroy your future? You fight. You rise." It went viral. Hundreds of comments. Sympathy from strangers. Likes, reposts, angry emojis. But then the comments started to shift. Someone posted a screenshot of her messages with Daniel. Another person linked to a Reddit thread where Jessica had asked anonymously, "What do I do if I don't love my fiancé but need his family's money to fund my real life?" It was all falling apart. The public was turning. Her voice was cracking. And that's when she called me. Not to apologize, but to beg. "Please, please don't press charges. Please just drop everything." Her voice was hoarse, no longer polished. No longer curated. Just raw. I said nothing for a moment. Then I asked, "Do you remember what you told me at the wedding?" Silence. "You said there was no seat for me at the table," I whispered. "That I was non-essential. That I could wait in the lounge or leave." Her breath caught. "Well, Jessica," I continued, "I left. But now you're the one outside. And the house you wanted to sit in doesn't have a door for you anymore." Hung up. The lawsuit was quietly dropped 2 days later. No mediation. No statement. No apology. Just silence. The kind that only comes when someone realizes they've lost everything. But even then, my story wasn't over. Because months after the dust settled, after David moved into his own apartment, after Jessica disappeared from social media, after the flowers faded and the dress got boxed away, I got a letter. Handwritten. From Daniel. That Daniel. And what he confessed inside changed everything I thought I knew about the entire scheme. What did the man Jessica really loved have to say to me, the mother of the groom she betrayed? Next chapter will answer everything, and leave your jaw on the floor. If you're still with me, type next chapter now in the comments and let's finish what we started. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The return address said Texas, scrawled in messy penmanship. But I recognized the name instantly. Daniel Connolly. The man I had only seen in secret Facebook photos. The man whose name showed up on the luxury suite I'd unknowingly paid for. The man Jessica had stayed with the night before the wedding. I opened the letter with trembling hands, unsure of what I expected. It began plainly. Mrs. Monroe. I hope this letter finds you before it finds the trash. I wouldn't blame you if it didn't. Already I was holding my breath. I never intended to get involved. Not like this. I knew Jessica was playing games, but I didn't realize how deep it went until I saw what she did to you. That was never part of the plan. She told me you were cold, controlling, hated her from the start. I believed her. I paused there, hands shaking. But then I saw your face in the photos. And I saw how you were cropped out of every single one. I read the wedding recap she posted online, and she never mentioned you once. Not even in the acknowledgements. And that's when I realized. She was still lying. Still hiding. Still manipulating. He continued. We were together off and on for 4 years. Long before David. She always said she'd never marry anyone she actually loved. That love was messy, but marriage was strategic. That's why she chose him. She called him stable. Said he came with benefits. You were one of those benefits. I clutched my chest. She used me for fun. Him for a future. And you to pay for the whole thing. I should have said something sooner. I should have stopped her. But I didn't, and I have to live with that now. Sorry. At the bottom of the letter, Daniel included screenshots of messages I hadn't seen before. Voicemails, photos, even a bank transfer where she sent him a deposit titled, "For next month's hush money." Hush money. Jessica had been paying him. And now that it all came crashing down, he was trying to clear his conscience. I folded the letter and sat in the silence of my little house. The same house where David had learned to ride a bike in the front yard, where Jessica had once rolled her eyes at my curtain rods, where I had almost believed I was nothing more than the help at my own child's wedding. But I wasn't just the help. I was the foundation, the builder, bank, the mother, and now, the one holding every truth. I debated whether to share the letter with David. He was finally healing, smiling again. He had started seeing someone new, a soft-spoken schoolteacher named Elaine who brought homemade banana bread and called me ma'am, even when I told her not to. But I couldn't keep this from him. He deserved the full picture. When I showed him the letter, his hands shook. She really said that about me?" he asked, his voice low. "She said worse," I replied gently. "But you're not that man, David. You never were. You were just the one who tried to give her the life she pretended to want." He looked like he might cry. But then, something shifted in his face. "I'm going to make this right," he said. "Not just for me. For you." And he did. David drafted a letter of his own. Not to Jessica, but to every vendor, every guest, every friend who had stood by her version of the story. He told them the truth. He told them about the manipulation, the lies, the financial abuse. He thanked them for attending the wedding but admitted it was built on fiction. And most of all, he apologized for not standing by me, his mother, when it mattered most. He didn't need to, but he did. That letter went more viral than Jessica's Mirror post. Changed the narrative overnight. And as for Jessica, she vanished. Last I heard, she was working for a boutique event planner in another state. No more social media posts. No more articles. Just silence. But life didn't go silent for me. After everything, I finally booked that Alaska trip I'd put off for the wedding. Took that dental surgery too. Even splurged on a hot tub for the backyard. A silly indulgence maybe, but one I earned. And Elaine. She started calling me Mama H. I liked it. But just when I thought the past was finally behind us, I got another letter. This one wasn't from Jessica. It was from her mother. And what she wrote inside tore open a part of my heart I didn't realize was still raw. Because while Jessica had burned every bridge, her mother had been hiding a truth too painful to admit. A truth about Jessica's childhood, about her father, and about the reason she learned to lie, manipulate, and destroy before she ever learned to love. What was Jessica's mother hiding all along? The next chapter will change how you see everything. Type "keep going" in the comments if you're ready for the truth behind the villain. The envelope sat in the center of my kitchen table like a ghost. Cream-colored. Handwritten. Soft cursive that reminded me of old wedding invitations. Return address. Margaret Elwood. Jessica's mother. I hadn't heard a word from her since the wedding. Not a call. Not a message. Not even when her daughter filed a lawsuit against me. But now, months later, here it was. I opened it slowly, carefully, half expecting venom on paper. Instead, I found something else. A handwritten letter that trembled with truth. Dear Mrs. Monroe, I owe you more than an apology, but that's the only thing I can give. You don't know me well. That's by design. I stayed out of the wedding intentionally. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to interfere in what Jessica was building. Even though I saw where it was headed, I kept my distance. And for that I am sorry. I paused there, already clutching the paper tighter. The ink was smudged in places, like it had been written through tears. Jessica wasn't born this way. She was raised in a house full of silence and tension. My husband, her father, was a man who controlled everything. Our finances, our movements, the thoughts. He taught Jessica early on that emotions were weaknesses, that charm was a tool, that people were pawns. I didn't realize how much she had absorbed from him until it was too late. I swallowed hard. When she was 15, she overheard him negotiating a business deal over the phone. He called the woman he was speaking to a stupid cow with too many emotions. Jessica laughed. She told me later, "That's how you win in life, don't feel too much." She stopped hugging me. She stopped crying. And I let it happen, thinking it was just a phase. But she was hardening, becoming a mirror of him. She used her beauty like a weapon. She learned early how to bend men, make them feel chosen, then toss them aside once they were no longer useful. I stopped breathing for a second. When she met your son, I saw something shift. For a moment, I hoped she'd changed. David was kind, steady, honest in a way she hadn't been exposed to. But old habits don't die, especially when they're fed with power. When she told me how much money you were putting into the wedding, I begged her to let you be involved. She told me you wanted the attention, and that you were old-fashioned. She claimed you would make it all about yourself. I believed her. And for that I will never forgive myself. I leaned back, hands shaking, heart heavy. After the wedding collapsed, I tried to speak to her. She laughed. Said, "The old woman finally found her backbone. Good for her." She felt no remorse. I'm writing you now because I've lost my daughter to something I helped create by staying silent for too long. But I see your strength. I watched what you did. How you stood up, not with screaming, but with silence that roared. You reminded me what real motherhood looks like. I just wanted you to know. You were right to walk away. But please don't mistake her cruelty for your failure. Jessica was broken long before she met David. And you were the only one who ever stood up to her. Thank you. Elwood. I sat in stunned silence, tears burning behind my eyes. Not because I pitied Jessica, but because I finally understood. She wasn't just a villain. She was the daughter of one. That didn't excuse what she did. Not the lies, the manipulation, the lawsuit, the betrayal. But it explained the emptiness in her eyes. The way she could smile through cruelty. The absence of guilt. It explained everything. David came over that evening, and I showed him the letter. He read it slowly. His face hardened. You think this means she's a victim too? He asked. No, I said. She had a choice. But maybe she was never taught how to make the right one. He nodded, eyes distant. It makes sense. I used to wonder why she couldn't handle kindness. Why every time I did something gentle, she'd flinch or lash out. She was raised in a war, I said. And she learned to shoot first. David folded the letter and tucked it into his jacket. I don't hate her, he whispered. But I'm glad she's gone. I squeezed his hand. Me too. The next week, David officially annulled the marriage. He filed under fraud and misrepresentation. The documents were finalized without resistance. Jessica didn't even show up. Maybe she was gone for good. But part of me knew. People like Jessica don't disappear. They resurface. When the dust settles. When the pity pool runs dry and they need a new story to feed on. And I was right. 'Cause 3 months later I got a call. Not from David. Not from Jessica's mother. But from a reporter. She was writing a piece on wedding fraud and emotional manipulation. She'd received a tip. Photos. Screenshots. An anonymous submission claiming Jessica had exploited an elderly woman for wedding funding, then discarded her. The woman on the other end of the line asked, "Are you Helen Monroe?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "And were you, in fact, removed from your son's wedding by the bride herself?" Paused, heart pounding. "I was," I said softly. "And did you, in turn, revoke financial support and discover prior deceit on her part?" I hesitated, then replied, "Yes. But this story isn't about vengeance. It's about boundaries. And waking up." There was a long pause. "Would you be willing to tell your side?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Because suddenly, this wasn't just my story anymore. It was the story of every woman who had been made to feel disposable after building everything. And I had a voice now. What do you think I said to that reporter? What did I reveal? And how did the world react when the real truth was finally broadcast? The next chapter is where it all goes public. If you're still with me, type "next chapter" now in the comments and share this with someone who needs the reminder. Your silence is not required. When the reporter asked if I'd be willing to share my story, I felt my spine straighten. Not out of pride, but out of purpose. For months I'd been silent. Silenced at the wedding. Silenced in the narrative Jessica spun. Silenced in the lies told in whispers louder than truth. Now I had a choice. "I'll speak," I said into the phone. "But only if I can speak plainly. I won't paint myself as perfect. I won't embellish. And I'm not here to humiliate anyone. But if this helps one other mother, one other woman stand up for herself, then I'll do it." The reporter, Amanda, was quiet for a second. Then she said, "That's exactly what I'm looking for." We met the next morning at a little cafe I liked on the corner of Maple and 7th. Amanda was younger than I expected, with ink-stained fingers and a notepad that looked like it had been through a war. But she listened. Really listened. I told her everything. How Jessica first walked into my life like a shadow draped in silk. How I gave her love, money, my son's future, only to be told I wasn't essential on the biggest day of his life. How I walked away in silence, then took every penny I'd given and every ounce of dignity back. And how, in the process, I uncovered the truth about the affair, the manipulation, and the lie that almost became my son's marriage. Amanda took it all in. Asked thoughtful questions. Never once tried to twist it. 3 weeks later the article went live. "The mother of the groom who was erased, until she took it all back." That was the headline. Underneath was a black and white photo Amanda had taken of me sitting on my porch swing, holding a picture of young David in one hand and the wedding program in the other. The story spread like wildfire. Blogs reposted it. Podcasts quoted it. Women from around the world, widows, grandmothers, single mothers, caregivers, started messaging me. Thousands of them. "This happened to me at my daughter's wedding. My son's wife cut me out of everything too. I gave until I had nothing left but regret. Thank you for showing me it's okay to say no. Even to your own blood." I cried reading those messages. Not because they hurt, but because they reminded me I wasn't alone. None of us are. We just think we are because we've been taught that dignity means staying quiet. That's not dignity. That's disappearance. And I wasn't disappearing anymore. A week after the article dropped, I was invited to speak at a local women's group, then a book club, then a podcast hosted by two sisters who had survived something similar. They called me Mama Monroe. Made me laugh. David came with me to one of the panels. He listened as I spoke to a room full of women who had lost their voices in their own families. At the end he stood up. "I want to say something," he said, voice quivering. He looked at me, then back at the room. "I didn't protect my mother when I should have. I let love blind me. I let comfort make me weak. But what she did, how she stood back up, taught me more than anything I've ever learned from a man." Then he walked across the room and hugged me. That moment healed something in me I didn't even know was still cracked. And yet, even after all that, there was one thing still unfinished. I hadn't seen Jessica. Not once since the day she served me that legal envelope. Until she showed up on my porch. 6 months after the wedding imploded, after the lawsuits dropped, after the truth was published and the lies were dust, she appeared. It was a Saturday morning. I was sipping coffee, watching birds dance in the yard. Then a car pulled up. She stepped out, wearing sunglasses, hair tied back, posture a little more human. She didn't bring flowers, just herself. I met her at the screen door. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood there and said, "I lost everything. And I blamed you for all of it." I didn't speak. I let her talk. "But the truth is, you didn't take anything from me. You just took back what was already yours." She pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were tired. "Hello. I'm not here to make peace," she said. "Because I don't think I deserve it." Silence. "Then why are you here?" Finally asked. "To say, you were right," she whispered. "And to tell you, I never had a mother like you. I didn't know how to be loved like that." The porch was still. Wind rustled the trees. I looked at her. A girl who once made me feel like furniture. Now standing like a ghost of herself. And I said softly, "I hope you find peace. But you won't find it here." She nodded, turned, left. And that was the last time I saw her. No apology. No hug. Just the quiet acknowledgement that I had drawn a line. And kept it. That day, I finally closed the door on her. And everything she tried to take from me. But I opened the door to something else. Myself. Because I'd spent years being the mother of. Now I was just Helen. And Helen had a story. And Helen was loved. By her son. By new friends. By a community of women who had once been forgotten, but now stood taller because they saw themselves in me. Because of that one chair at that one wedding. I reclaimed every part of me. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of your worth, or showed you the power of quiet strength, please like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, silence is not dignity. Boundaries are not cruelty. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Your story matters too. Never forget it. The days after Jessica's visit passed like the slow turning of pages in a long finished book. There was nothing more to say. No apologies. No revenge. No final chapter with fireworks. Only healing. I'd spent so long being reactive, putting out fires, cleaning up messes, covering my wounds with silence. Now, for the first time in years, I was just being. Breathing. Existing without holding my breath. And then something unexpected happened. Publishing agent reached out. She'd read the article. She'd listened to my podcast interview. She'd followed the waves of support that poured in across forums and comment sections. "I believe your story could help thousands more," she said. "Would you consider writing it as a book?" I was stunned. Me. A book. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I didn't want a platform to be famous. I didn't want applause or pity or even praise. I just wanted other women to see what I never did, until it was almost too late. That no one has the right to treat you like an accessory to your own child's life. That generosity should never be mistaken for servitude. That love is not a leash. So I said yes. We began drafting the chapters, not so different from these I'm sharing with you now. Only this time every story had a purpose. Every painful moment had a place. And then came a letter I didn't expect. Not from Jessica. Not from her mother. But from another mother. Across the country. An 81-year-old woman named Lorraine who had watched her daughter-in-law push her out of the family home she'd helped build. She wrote, "I read your story in silence with tears in my eyes. They told me I was dramatic when I asked for respect. They said I was old-fashioned when I wanted to be involved in my grandson's life. But when I saw what you did, how you took back what was yours without screaming, I realized I wasn't alone." She ended it with, "Thank you, Helen. Thank you for showing me that leaving the room doesn't mean you're defeated. It means you're done begging to belong." I cried reading that. I cried for her. For me. For every woman who ever sat at a family table and felt like a guest in a house she built. I included her letter in the dedication of my book. But this journey wasn't just about pain. Or even justice. It was about what came after. David was healing too. He kept seeing Elaine, the schoolteacher with gentle eyes and a strength that matched his new way of living. She never once asked him to prove his worth. She never once erased me from his life. In fact, she invited me to dinner once a week and sent handwritten thank you notes like people used to do in a better time. One evening we all sat together on the porch, me, David, and Elaine, and he turned to me and said, "Do you know what the best part of all this is?" "What?" I asked. "I know who I am now," he said. "Because I finally saw who you are." He took my hand and kissed it like he did when he was little. That kiss carried more healing than any apology ever could. But just when I thought the chapters of my story were complete, something else happened. The publishing agent called again. "Your story's gaining traction," she said. "A producer reached out. They're interested in adapting your book into a limited series." I laughed out loud. "A TV show? About me?" "Yes," she said. "They said it reminded them of the Queen's Gambit, but instead of chess, it's quiet power. Feminine resilience. Real dignity." I didn't believe it. Until the contract came. Until they asked me to come to Los Angeles for a meeting. Until I stood in a room full of young women who looked at me with wide eyes, hanging on to every word I said. Not because I was famous, but because I had survived something they feared they couldn't. I sat there and thought of every woman like Lorraine. Like me. And I knew then. This story wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. But there was one final thing I needed to do. One last piece of closure. I called Jessica's mother, Margaret. She answered on the second ring. "I read your book," she said softly. "I know," I replied. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Thank you for telling the truth. You could have burned her down, but instead, you opened a door." "I hope she walks through it someday," I said. "She might. And if she doesn't, at least you did." We said goodbye. And just like that, the last thread was snipped. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. But freedom came with something else. A new letter. From a woman I didn't know. She'd seen the article, podcast, the book. And she had a story too. One so familiar. It chilled me. Her name was Joyce. And she said she had a daughter-in-law who was now using my story as a guide. Not to learn, but to prevent it from happening to her. Jessica had resurfaced. And now she was teaching others how to safeguard their weddings, their image, their control, by cutting off mothers before they could speak. Jessica had taken my truth and turned it into a warning label. But what she didn't know was that I had one final move left. One final chapter. One last voice louder than anything she could ever write. Next chapter will be the ending she never saw coming. If you've followed me this far, comment "final chapter" now. And share this with someone who needs to see what real closure looks like. Because quiet women don't stay silent forever. When I read that Jessica was using my story, not to learn, not to reflect, but to teach others how to silence women like me before they ever spoke. I didn't get angry. Not this time. Got determined. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman who ever poured her love, her savings, her soul into her family, only to be told she was too much, in the way, not needed anymore. Jessica thought she could take my voice and twist it into a cautionary tale. But what she forgot was that I still had the mic. And now the whole world was listening. So I decided to end it once and for all. At the official book launch in New York, the publisher arranged a live panel event. There were rows of women in the audience, some older, some my age, and many young ones too. Women who hadn't yet experienced the kind of heartbreak that sneaks in through family and wears the mask of tradition. David was there. Elaine too. They sat in the front row, holding hands. I stood on stage in a simple navy blue dress, not because I was trying to impress, but because it was the dress I wore the last time I felt truly seen by my late husband. He had once told me, "You walk in that dress like it belongs to a queen." And tonight it finally did. The moderator leaned into her mic and said, "Mrs. Monroe, before we close tonight, there's a rumor circulating that someone mentioned in your story is actively speaking against your version of events. Do you have anything you want to say?" The audience hushed, smiled, leaned in, and said, "Yes, let them speak." Gasps scattered through the room. Continued, "Let them speak, because the truth doesn't tremble under noise. Let them teach others how to erase women like me, because women like me will no longer be silent. We will write. We will publish. We will rise. And we will raise a generation of daughters and sons who know that strength doesn't come from domination. It comes from decency." The room erupted in applause. But I wasn't done. I lifted a small envelope from the podium and held it up. "This," I said, "is the original signed contract from the wedding vendors. The one Jessica forgot I had. Contains the clause that protected me. The clause that said, if I am removed from the wedding, I am removed from the bill." Opened it. Displayed it on the projector screen. "You can try to erase a mother's presence," I said, "but you better remember, we are the ones who write the checks and the history." The audience stood. Every woman in that room stood. It wasn't just applause. It was recognition. And Jessica. She was watching. I know because the very next day, she posted a long-winded statement online. She tried to twist it, said the contracts were doctored, that I had used the media to gain sympathy. But no one believed her anymore. She'd lost the court of opinion, and the court of law months ago. Her words rang hollow, brittle, desperate. And mine were inked into history. The book became a bestseller in 6 weeks. Titled simply, Uninvited. It wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about every door that had been closed on a woman who once owned the house. About every chair pulled out from under someone who spent her life setting the table. About every whisper that said, "You don't belong here." And the roar that finally answered back, "Yes, I do." Months passed. Then a year. David and Elaine married quietly. Small backyard ceremony. Just close friends and family. No designer gowns. No hidden cameras. No tension. Just love. Elaine handed me a small box that morning. Inside was a pearl bracelet. "I know you gave everything the first time," she said, tears in her eyes. "So this time, let us give something back." I wore that bracelet like armor. Not because it sparkled, but because it was given with respect. And finally, without conditions. Now I spend my mornings with a cup of tea and my evenings answering letters from women around the world. Some are grandmothers. Some are newlyweds. Some are writing from hospital beds or church pews or quiet kitchens like mine. They all say the same thing. Thank you for speaking when we couldn't. And that's the lesson I'll leave you with. Never let anyone make you feel like your value has an expiration date. Never let someone sit in a seat you built, just to tell you you're not worthy to be at the table. And if they do, stand up, look out, and take your table with you. You are not disposable. You are not just the mother of. You are the backbone, the architect, the storyteller. And your silence is not a gift. Your voice is. So use it. Because someone somewhere is waiting to hear their story in yours. Just like you heard yours in mine. If this story moved you, made you cry, made you angry, made you stronger, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Comment your favorite part. And remember, every woman you know is fighting to be seen. Let's be the mirrors that show each other the truth. We are not invisible. We are not weak. We are not done.